The following program is intended for mature audiences.
Welcome, and I probably don't have a specific title for this episode. It's going to base it on some recent interaction I had with people, either in person or online, and more has to do with really stand-up comedy. Kudos for those who think they're funny, who think that their unique perspective is hilarious and better than other comics. You know, it just comes to mind people who I hear say, I'm funny. I think I'm funny. I'm gonna give stand-up a shot. Well, you may be funny to like 4 of your friends who you get high with, but to a room full of 40 people, you may not be. I don't know why people think stand-up comedy is easy. I don't get that. I don't know why they think because they're funny. You gotta have material, and I think you have to have truthful material. You can't have this Seinfeld point of view look at life and then go up on stage and why do I don't think so. There's no money in it, and I know you just do it for the love. I recently had an interaction with a 44-year-old woman, and apparently she's done some open mics, and I don't know. She was telling me some of her material, and I guess for Pittsburgh it could be funny, but personally for me, the date was alright, but I didn't find her to be funny. So don't quit your day job. I think that's why there's so many out there, and I blame the 80s, because the decade of the 1980s, there's explosion of just a bunch of comedy specials on television that featured a handful of comics at a time, and I may have been too young for some of the material, and as I YouTubed it later these past years, you could see why some made it and some didn't, and why I think maybe just the art of stand-up comedy is lost. There's an art to it, I believe. How many times can you hear about the single person dating disasters, terrible imitations, politics, which if done correctly, great set. If done terribly, very bad. So I should be a subject really off base. Shouldn't talk about it. And then you got the comics who then they get married and they have a kid and they talk about their kids because everybody wants to hear about kid stories. Or the black comic who talk about white people and their weirdness or their weird behavior, whatever. Because that's funny because Richard Pryor did it and he was probably the best at it, and after that nobody should really touch it. Or the female comic who talks about being a feminist and women power, and then goes and contradicts herself talking about body image and shaming herself. And I get it's just an act, but maybe get a new act. Me personally, I don't watch a lot of stand-up. I don't. It's like watching a car wreck. Not that I go out and try to find car wrecks. Just like I don't go out and try to find comedy shows to go to. And here's a couple reasons why. I don't know if some comics feel that they need to be the court jester 24/7. Maybe they should just give it a break. That when they appear on talk shows and they start to talk and, oh yeah, they're making the host laugh, and they're making the audience laugh, and that's on one show, and then you see them on another show. Not that I'm following or singling out, comics. Sometimes it trended that way for me for a little bit, to where I noticed comics on numerous talk shows start to talk and go into their act. When they start to go into their act, that's annoying for me, because then what's the point of watching your special? So I could hear your joke about milk, or about catching a dick, or about dating disasters for the 5,000th time. The same joke. It's just not fresh at all. And I don't know if it's for repetition purposes, or if it's just for rehearsing your lines and your act from show to show. Can't you just make an appearance, talk to the host like a normal person, without shilling, without always having to be on? Is that too hard to ask? And you can tell by some comics who, they always got to get that one joke in, whether it fits or not into the scene that they're in. They always get that one comment in. It was like, because it was like a softball pitch. It was a flop. They're setting it up like, they got to say, and you knew it was coming. You knew miles away it was coming. No one cares about your, and I love this phrase, unique perspective on people in Walmart, or, I'm from southwestern Pennsylvania, and I couldn't give a shit less about Permanis or Yinzers or anything like that. There's this person on Twitter. I don't know what they're an entertainer. I don't know what she is. I don't know. I think she's from the area. I'm not entirely sure. And against better judgment, I interacted with her. I don't know exactly what I said, but she's like, "Oh, Yinzer." That really pissed me off, and I replied, I said, "I'm not a Yinzer." And I said, and she didn't reply, and I didn't expect her to, but don't just group me in with a bunch of annoying people. So I'm not from Pittsburgh. Not that I like where I'm from anyway, but sure as hell not from Pittsburgh. Where I ended up following her on Twitter anyway. Allie Spagnola. That was her name. Like, I give a shit. Like, she's listening to this. She's out playing some kind of electric drums or keyboard or some shit. And maybe I do this to rib people, to see if they tune in, because I know they're not. But you could ask yourself, where is your career going as a comic if Gallagher is the main attraction on your night of nights on TV? The racist, out-of-touch Gallagher, who has been smashing watermelons for 40 years. That's hilarious. Let me get my suspenders, striped shirt, and my big old hammer out and smash a bunch of fruit. Hilarious. Creative. Why isn't this guy a billionaire? I hope that 44-year-old that I had a drink with, I hope she puts me in her set. I wonder if she could come up with some kind of clever, funny anecdote of our interaction, because there was none to be given. What's she going to say? That, oh yeah, he liked to push the envelope, and he messaged me and just, seeking out a strictly friends with benefit. Well, yeah, I want to own up to that and say, yes, I did. And what's so funny about that? Nothing. There's nothing funny about it. Try to turn that into a joke. There are people out there who are just a complete insult to stand-up comedy. Plain and simple. And, I don't need to go out there and perform. I don't care if I go out there and I kill a set or I bomb. Comics are some of the most bitter people you ever meet. That's true. Because as I watched a bunch of interviews with some that I did know, maybe not everybody knows that, they're not a household name. And you tell the bitterness that they have because they didn't make it big. What are you going to do? There's not room at the top for everyone. At some point, your dream becomes a nightmare, and you have to stop living it and go out and be with the regular folk. Everyone's entitled to a one-hit wonder in their life. Just make sure you're cashing in. Now, some of the best comics I've ever witnessed are when I'm at the local bars and it becomes, the Joe Blow show. Because they're there. Because when they start talking loud, and then like every time they're in the bar, they got to bring up some kind of porn comment or strip club comment. I'm like, oh, this guy's hilarious. Got another Dave Coulier on our hands here in the bar. And that's when I start to get a tension headache, and then I have to leave. There's nothing wrong sitting in the bar in the silence. Maybe the TV on, some sports. Maybe once in a while some music gets played. That's fine. But those type of people aren't going to pull that shit in some bar out of town because they get their ass kicked. Very tolerant people around here, I guess. What is funny? Who knows?